You probably know that Baghdad was once the most magnificent city in the Muslim world, the heart of an empire that stretched from Spain to India. But what if I told you that this city, home to scholars, scientists, and poets, this city that once illuminated the world with its brilliance, was destroyed in the span of just 7 days? Imagine it. It's 1258. The air is thick with smoke, the sound of chaos reverberates through the streets, and the Tigris River runs black with ink and red with blood. Nearly 1 million lives are lost. The greatest Muslim city of its time, the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, is being torn apart. This was not the result of an internal rebellion or civil war. No, the destruction of Baghdad came at the hands of Hulagu Khan, grandson of the infamous Genghis Khan, and his relentless Mongol forces. And it was swift. In just a week, libraries, vast troves of knowledge, were burned to the ground, scholars executed, and centuries of Islamic civilization were erased from history. But here's what most people don't realize. Baghdad wasn't just a city, it was the intellectual capital of the Muslim world. The House of Wisdom, where scholars gathered to translate, learn, and create, was reduced to ashes. In the wake of this carnage, the Islamic Golden Age, which had fueled advances in mathematics, medicine, and philosophy, came to a crashing halt. The Mongols didn't just kill, they wiped away the very soul of Islamic civilization. How could such a profound civilization fall so quickly? The answer lies in the events that led up to this catastrophic moment. And that is where our story begins. Imagine walking through the streets of Baghdad during the peak of its glory. The city hums with life, its markets vibrant, its libraries filled with scholars and books. The year is 750 AD. This is the center of the Islamic world, a beacon of knowledge, culture, and innovation. Here, Muslim scholars have translated Greek, Persian, and Indian works into Arabic, preserving and expanding the knowledge of entire civilizations. This is where algebra was born, where astronomy reached new heights, and where medicine flourished with the likes of Ibn Sina. Baghdad, the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, is not just a city. It is the beating heart of a vast empire that stretches across continents. It is home to the House of Wisdom, a grand library and research institution that becomes the envy of the world. Scholars here don't just study, they push the boundaries of human understanding. It's where the ancient world's knowledge is preserved and where new ideas are born. But by the 13th century, this once thriving metropolis has begun to crumble. The Abbasid Caliphate, weakened by internal strife and external pressures, has lost its former glory. The empire is no longer united. The caliphs, once powerful leaders of the Islamic world, are now mere figureheads. Political fragmentation runs deep, and the once unshakable authority of the Abbasids is now a shadow of its former self. In the east, a new and terrifying power rises, the Mongols. Led by Genghis Khan and later his descendants, the Mongol Empire sweeps through Central Asia with unmatched speed and brutality. Their armies, fierce and unstoppable, have already decimated Persia and Afghanistan. Now they are eyeing the heart of the Islamic world, the city of Baghdad. But here's the tragic irony. Despite their intellectual might, the Abbasid rulers fail to comprehend the threat of the Mongols. They underestimate their ferocity, dismissing them as mere barbarians. The caliph's arrogance, their inability to unite and properly defend their own lands, would seal their fate. And as the Mongols march closer, Baghdad remains confident, unaware that the end of an era is fast approaching. Picture this. It's 1258, and the Mongol army is advancing westward. A sea of soldiers, ruthless and relentless, marching through the desert plains. Hulagu Khan, grandson of the fearsome Genghis Khan, leads them. Hulagu isn't just a warrior, he's a conqueror, and he has been given a singular mission: to erase the Abbasid Caliphate from the face of the earth. But what most people don't know is that Hulagu's army isn't alone. He has formed an alliance with Christian powers. namely the Crusaders. In a strange and tragic twist of fate, Christians and Mongols join forces against a common enemy, the Muslim world. The Mongols, with their unmatched military tactics, sweep across cities like Khwarezm, Persia, and Afghanistan, leaving devastation in their wake. And now they set their sights on Baghdad. But the Caliphate? Baghdad's rulers believe they're untouchable. They dismiss the threat, underestimating the Mongols, seeing them as nothing more than barbaric invaders. The Caliph, al-Mustasim, doesn't see the storm that's gathering on the horizon. He sends envoys to Hulagu Khan, thinking he can negotiate peace. But this is no ordinary foe. Hulagu Khan isn't interested in diplomacy. He has already made up his mind. Baghdad must fall. In 1258, Hulagu Khan arrives at the gates of Baghdad, and the city's defenses are laughably weak. There's no unified resistance, just disarray. The Caliph, more concerned with his court and luxuries, fails to organize an adequate defense. His soldiers are unprepared, and the walls of Baghdad, once impregnable, now stand vulnerable. But here's what most people don't realize. The Mongols were masters of siege warfare. They didn't just attack. They psychologically broke their enemies first. Hulagu's army surrounds the city, cutting off supplies and starving the inhabitants. The siege is not just a military campaign, but a psychological one as well. The people inside Baghdad don't just face a military force, they face fear itself. As the days pass, rumors spread like wildfire. The Mongols are coming. The city's residents, once confident in their invincibility, now panic. And the walls of Baghdad, those towering defenses, begin to look less like a barrier and more like a tomb. Despite the city's apparent strength, there's no escape. Baghdad has become a trap. But the betrayal doesn't stop there. While the city is besieged, the Caliph continues to send false messages of peace. He believes the Mongols will spare him, that his diplomatic overtures will save the city. But what he doesn't know is that Hulagu Khan already has his plans, and they do not include mercy. By the time the Mongol army breaches the city walls, it is already too late. Baghdad's fate has been sealed. The city, the heart of the Islamic world, is on the brink of annihilation. But what happens next is even more horrifying. The gates of Baghdad have fallen. The Mongols are inside, and what follows is nothing short of hell. Imagine the chaos. Streets once bustling with merchants, scholars, and traders are now flooded with blood. The Mongols, ruthless in their pursuit of destruction, unleash a massacre the likes of which the world has never seen. The air is thick with the screams of men, women, and children. It is not just a military conquest. It is a slaughter. The Mongols don't just kill. They annihilate. Thousands are executed in the streets, their bodies piling up like rubble. The Tigris River, which once flowed with the lifeblood of Baghdad, now runs red. Red with the blood of the innocent. Red with the death of a civilization. But the true tragedy, the true horror of this day, lies in the loss of knowledge. The House of Wisdom, the greatest library in the Muslim world, is burned to the ground. Imagine, centuries of knowledge, manuscripts, scientific works, and philosophical treatises, gone in an instant. The finest minds in the Islamic world gathered here, translating the wisdom of the ancients into Arabic. It was the birthplace of mathematics, medicine, and astronomy. And now, in the blink of an eye, it is reduced to ash. This destruction was not accidental. The Mongols understood the symbolic power of knowledge. By burning the House of Wisdom, they weren't just erasing books, they were erasing the very soul of Islamic civilization. The loss of these texts wasn't just the loss of a few books, it was the erasure of centuries of intellectual progress. Thousands of scholars who had dedicated their lives to advancing knowledge were murdered or scattered. The Mongols understood that by destroying the scholars, they could destroy the future. In the chaos, entire families are torn apart. Fathers and sons, mothers and daughters are separated, their fates sealed. Many are executed on the spot, while others are enslaved. Women are captured, forced into bondage, and taken far from their homes. The city that once stood as a symbol of intellectual and cultural pride is now a shell of its former self. Eyewitness accounts from survivors like the historian Ibn al-Athir describe the horrors in vivid detail. One survivor recalls seeing the streets flooded with corpses, with bodies so numerous they created barriers to movement. Ibn al-Athir himself, who was far away at the time, recorded the devastation as the final act of the Abbasid Caliphate, the end of an era. But the destruction doesn't stop there. Hospitals, mosques, and homes are ransacked, looted, and set ablaze. The city's infrastructure collapses. Trade stops. The once thriving heart of the Muslim world is now a desolate wasteland. The smoke from the burning city rises into the sky, visible for miles, as if even nature itself mourns the loss. This is more than just a conquest. It is a cultural genocide, a systematic attempt to erase everything that Baghdad stood for. And what happened here in these few days would echo for centuries, changing the trajectory of Islamic civilization forever. But what happened to the leaders of Baghdad? What became of the Caliph, who thought he could negotiate his way out of this catastrophe? The fate of the man who ruled this great city is even more horrifying. Main story. Arc 3, 600 words. As the streets of Baghdad burn and the Tigris swells with the blood of the innocent, the final act of this tragedy begins. The city's heart, once beating with knowledge and culture, now pulses with fear and desperation. But it is not the people of Baghdad who are the last to fall. It is the Caliph himself, the man who, just days before, ruled the greatest city in the Islamic world, now faces the consequences of his arrogance. Caliph al-Mustasim, the last of the Abbasid rulers, has long underestimated the Mongols. From the moment Hulagu Khan's forces arrived at the gates, the Caliph believed he could negotiate his way out of this catastrophe. Despite the Mongols' brutal conquests across Persia and Central Asia, he still sent emissaries to Hulagu, thinking he could save Baghdad through diplomacy. His last hope lay in his belief that the Mongols, driven by fearsome reputation, but unfamiliar with the intricacies of Islamic politics, would spare him. But the Mongols had no intention of negotiating. Hulagu had already given his orders. Baghdad would fall, and so would the Caliph's dynasty. When the city finally succumbs, and the last walls of resistance are crushed, al-Mustasim is captured. The fate of this last Caliph is not just a personal tragedy, it is a symbolic end to the Abbasid legacy. Imagine the scene. The ruler of a once great empire, now dragged from his palace, his regal robes torn, his crown ripped from his head. It is said that Hulagu Khan had al-Mustasim brought before him and subjected him to one of the most humiliating fates imaginable. The exact details of his execution remain shrouded in mystery, but historical accounts tell us that the Caliph was suffocated by being wrapped in a rug, as a symbolic act of erasing his very existence. This execution is a moment of brutal finality. Not only is the Caliph dead, but the Abbasid dynasty's centuries-old authority over the Muslim world is erased. In this moment, the Islamic world loses its figurehead, and the unity that the Abbasids once symbolized is torn asunder. What's worse, the execution of the Caliph isn't just a political act, it's a psychological one. The Mongols knew exactly what they were doing. By killing the last Abbasid Caliph, they sent a message, not just to Baghdad, but to the entire Islamic world. The symbol of Islamic unity, the Caliph, was now gone, and in his place, chaos, destruction, and Mongol domination. The fall of Baghdad, the murder of al-Mustasim. It is not just the end of one man, but the collapse of an entire civilization. A civilization that had once stretched from Andalusia to the banks of the Tigris. The Abbasid dynasty, with its centuries of power, influence, and wisdom, is now reduced to rubble. But the question that remains is this: how does a civilization recover from this kind of devastation? How do you rebuild after the very foundation of your identity has been torn away? The survivors of Baghdad are left with nothing but the scars of this catastrophe, and the repercussions of this destruction will be felt across the Muslim world for generations to come. But even in the face of total annihilation, there are sparks of hope. Some survivors managed to escape, to carry on the torch of knowledge that was almost extinguished. But what happened to them, and where did they go? What did they take with them from this devastation? The true cost of Baghdad's fall is just beginning to be understood. The dust of Baghdad's destruction still hangs heavy in the air. The fires have burnt down the city's heart, and the streets once vibrant with life now lie in ruins. But beyond the libraries, the mosques, and the monumental losses of knowledge, there are the untold stories of the people. The survivors, the men, women, and children who lived through this nightmare, are left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Imagine you are one of them. Your city, your home, your family, all are gone in the blink of an eye. Whole neighborhoods have been leveled. Men and women are butchered in the streets. Children are separated from their parents. The streets run with blood, and the air is thick with smoke and the stench of death. One account comes from a survivor who remembers being forced to witness the execution of his family. As his father, his mother, and his siblings were slaughtered before his eyes, he felt a darkness settle over him, a darkness that would never leave. His city, his world, was gone, and in its place, a void. The Mongols did not just kill, they tore apart the very fabric of families. Hundreds of thousands of Muslims were taken as captives. Women, young and old, were enslaved, dragged from their homes and taken to distant lands. Many were forced into lives of servitude, their dignity stolen along with their freedom. The emotional devastation was felt far and wide as families were torn apart, never to be reunited. Those who were fortunate enough to escape the massacre were often left with nothing but the haunting memories of a city they could never return to. For the scholars, the destruction of Baghdad was not only the loss of their homes, it was the destruction of their life's work. The finest minds of the Muslim world were either executed or forced to flee, carrying with them the anguish of seeing centuries of knowledge erased in a matter of days. The House of Wisdom, a beacon of intellectual pursuit, was now a smoldering pile of ash. Its scholars, many of whom had dedicated their lives to the pursuit of knowledge, were scattered. Some managed to escape, while others, tragically, perished in the flames. One survivor, a prominent doctor, recalled seeing his colleagues, once revered throughout the Muslim world, dragged from their posts and killed in the streets. He fled with nothing but the knowledge in his mind, now the last remnant of an intellectual heritage that had been obliterated. But even this was not enough to escape the weight of the destruction. What is the cost of such devastation? It is not just the bodies that were lost, nor the buildings that crumbled. It is the loss of culture, of community, of everything that once made Baghdad the jewel of the Islamic world. For the survivors, it was the loss of an entire way of life, a deep wound that would never fully heal. But in the ashes of Baghdad, there were those who vowed to rebuild, who, despite the overwhelming loss, carried on the legacy of knowledge and culture that had been so brutally erased. But how would they do it? What would it take to carry this flame forward? The devastation wasn't just a single moment of loss, it was a trauma that would echo for generations. The fall of Baghdad wasn't just a moment of destruction, it was the beginning of a series of consequences that would echo throughout the entire Muslim world. The death toll, the physical destruction, and the cultural devastation were only the most visible parts of the tragedy. What many fail to realize is that the real cost of the Mongol invasion was hidden in the long-term effects it had on the Islamic world's intellectual, political, and economic power. The first and most visible consequence was the collapse of Islamic intellectual leadership. For centuries, Baghdad had been the center of knowledge, where scholars from all corners of the Muslim world gathered to study, learn, and build upon the wisdom of previous generations. The House of Wisdom, a shining beacon of learning, was not just a library. It was an institution that translated, preserved and advanced the scientific and philosophical knowledge of the ancient world. The destruction of this institution wasn't just the loss of books, it was the loss of a generation of scholars, ideas, and groundbreaking discoveries. With Baghdad's intellectual heart ripped out, the flow of knowledge that had once moved seamlessly from east to west ground to a halt. No longer could scholars easily communicate across the vast Islamic empire. The vibrant exchange of ideas between scientists, mathematicians, and philosophers dwindled. The intellectual centers of the Islamic world, once so united, were now scattered and fragmented. But the consequences were not only intellectual. The Mongol invasion dealt a crippling blow to the economic infrastructure of the Islamic world. Baghdad had been the commercial hub, where merchants from India, Africa, and Europe converged. Its markets were filled with goods, its ports were active, and its trade routes connected the east with the west. With the destruction of Baghdad, trade in the region was severely disrupted. The city's wealth, built on centuries of prosperity, was wiped out in a matter of days. The Mongol invasion also led to the fragmentation of the Muslim world. The unity that the Abbasid Caliphate had once provided was shattered, and in its place came a period of political fragmentation. Various Muslim dynasties rose to power in the wake of Baghdad's fall, but none could unite the vast territories that had once been controlled by the Caliphate. The Mongols, while devastating, had also created a power vacuum, which other forces filled, often leading to internal divisions and civil wars that further weakened the Muslim world. In the aftermath of this catastrophe, many Muslim leaders were left scrambling to pick up the pieces. They understood that the loss of Baghdad wasn't just the loss of a city, it was the loss of a symbol of unity and strength. As one historian later wrote, the fall of Baghdad marked the beginning of the end for the great Islamic empires, and indeed the devastation created a domino effect. The loss of Baghdad led to the loss of many other cities, the collapse of trade routes, and the weakening of political authority. But even in the face of such destruction, there were still those who sought to rebuild. However, the path to recovery was not an easy one. The scars of Baghdad's fall ran deep, and it would take centuries for the Muslim world to recover from this intellectual and political devastation. But the question remains, how could a civilization so rich in knowledge, culture, and unity fall so completely? And what was the true cost of the Mongol conquest, not just in lives, but in the very soul of a world that had once led the way in science, philosophy, and progress? The destruction of Baghdad in 1258 was not just a tragic chapter in history. It is a story that still resonates today. The fall of this great city, once a beacon of knowledge and power, has direct parallels to the challenges facing the Muslim world in the modern era. In fact, the echoes of Baghdad's destruction can still be heard in the wars, the divisions, and the vulnerabilities that plague the region today. Consider the 2003 invasion of Iraq. More than 700 years after the Mongols sacked Baghdad, another foreign power, this time the United States, would march into the same city, toppling its regime and leaving the region in chaos. The parallels are striking. Once again, Baghdad finds itself at the center of destruction, with the loss of lives, the disintegration of infrastructure, and the scattering of families. The idea that Baghdad, the heart of the Islamic world, could fall so easily is a haunting reminder of the city's fragility. But the invasion wasn't just about the destruction of a city. It was about the collapse of unity. Just as the Mongol invasion fractured the Muslim world, the modern conflict in Iraq exposed the deep political and sectarian divisions within the region. The aftermath of both invasions left the Muslim world fragmented, struggling with internal strife and the loss of cohesion, and in both cases, external powers played a major role in driving these divisions. But here's what most people don't realize. The true enemy of Baghdad was not just the invaders, but the disunity that allowed them to succeed. Whether it was the fragmented Abbasid Caliphate in 1258 or the sectarian divides in Iraq today, the lack of unity among the Muslim nations has been one of the greatest vulnerabilities. The Mongols didn't just destroy Baghdad, they broke the unity of the Islamic world, and the effects of that disunity are still felt today. What the Mongol conquest and the modern conflicts in Iraq both demonstrate is that the Muslim world's strength lies not in the size of its armies, but in the unity of its people. In both instances, the lack of a united front allowed external forces to penetrate and devastate the heart of Islamic civilization. So what lessons can we learn from the fall of Baghdad? How do we prevent history from repeating itself? The answer is painfully clear. The Muslim world must come together, as it once did in the past, to protect its heritage, its knowledge, and its unity. Only then can the tragic mistakes of the past be avoided. The fall of Baghdad in 1258 wasn't just the loss of a city. It was the loss of an entire world, a world that had once been the center of learning, culture, and innovation, a world that had illuminated the path of science, philosophy, and art for centuries. The Mongol invasion didn't just kill the people of Baghdad, it wiped away the very soul of a civilization. But here's the haunting truth. The city's destruction wasn't just a tragedy. It was a lesson about the fragility of greatness, a lesson about the importance of unity, and perhaps most of all, a lesson about the consequences of underestimating an enemy and failing to protect what you hold dear. As we look back at Baghdad, we must remember the cost of this catastrophe, not just in lives, but in the knowledge, culture, and unity that were lost. The once great libraries that contained centuries of wisdom are now nothing more than ruins. The scholars who dedicated their lives to advancing human knowledge are gone, and the very foundations of Islamic civilization were shaken to their core. But even in the face of this destruction, there was resilience. From the ashes of Baghdad, survivors scattered across the Muslim world determined to rebuild, and that spirit of resilience, of hope, of an unwavering belief in the power of knowledge is what we must carry forward. The Muslim world today still faces challenges, political divisions, external invasions, and the ever-present threat of fragmentation. But as we reflect on the fall of Baghdad, let us remember the lessons it teaches us. The strength of a civilization lies not in its wealth or power, but in its unity, in its ability to preserve and protect its knowledge, and in its commitment to rise, even after the darkest of days. So, as we honor Baghdad's memory, let us ask ourselves, how will we rebuild? How will we ensure that the lessons of the past are not forgotten? The future of the Muslim world depends on the answers to these questions. The legacy of Baghdad, the lessons of its fall, and the resilience of its people must live on.